Welcome to Step by Step Alpha Cloud. In this session, we're going to talk about what Alpha Cloud is. We'll go over considerations for migrating applications to Alpha Cloud. We'll walk through the process of publishing and deploying. We'll see how, if you have to, you can roll back your application to a prior version. We'll spend some time with the CloudView dialog, troubleshooting, and we'll talk about what you need to do to go to production. Finally, we'll take a look at security applications with an eye toward a better understanding of how users and roles are moved from your web project to production. After this presentation, you may have questions. There's quite a bit of documentation available on the web. You can follow this link or just do a web search for Alpha Cloud documentation. Alpha Cloud is easy, automated, reliable, scaled, secure deployment for Alpha Anywhere web and mobile applications. It's an automated and redundant environment. That means there are multiple servers, load balancing is built in, failover is automatic, scaling is automatic, and servers are automatically created as needed. Now, compared to an on-premises environment, you won't see servers that you can access. In fact, you don't have a need to. That means that you're not going to be putting files on your servers. You're going to use cloud storage. You're not going to be putting databases on your servers. You're going to be using database as a service. Now, there are some on-premises alternatives that we'll look at, but that's not typical. In migrating your application to Alpha Cloud, you need to consider several things, and most people don't run into all four of these issues, but I want to bring them up because some people do. First and foremost, your access to the database from the cloud is going to be different. You're not going to be hosting a production database on Alpha Cloud. You have test databases you can use, but not production. We recommend a database as a service provider such as Amazon RDS. There are others, Microsoft Azure, Google, both support database as a service. You have the option of opening your firewall to Alpha Cloud IP addresses as well. In any case, make sure you're using TLS or SSL security when you connect to your database. When you need to store files, you won't be putting them on Alpha Cloud. We don't host files right now. But we do recommend that you use Amazon Simple Storage Service, or S3. Alpha Anywhere has great support for storage services. We have an A5 storage object that is driven by connection strings, a lot like databases. We have support for Amazon S3, Azure, and you actually can set your connection string up to point to disk or network storage, so you don't have to write your application specifically for either case. There's action scripting support, and you should know that Alpha Cloud uses S3 to store applications and files for active sessions, so we're quite familiar with it. Third thing you need to consider is to check your code within your application and make sure that there's nothing that assumes that files are stored permanently on your server. We just talked about storage. The second thing is that security tables with users and roles are no longer available to your application once you move into the IIS arena, and Alpha Cloud uses IIS. IIS works with a membership provider, and that membership provider owns the data. You should not be mucking with the database. Even on premises, if you have access to the database, you shouldn't make any assumptions about where the users and roles are stored. Finally, for those few of you who are running third-party or custom binaries, those may actually work on Alpha Cloud. It's something that you probably want to shoot us an email to cloudsupport@alphasoftware.com, and we'll walk you through it. You can install DLLs if you have Xcopy deployables, meaning you could just physically copy your files. You can put them in the bin directory under your web project. Other than those four areas, most people don't have things that they have to change within their applications to get to Alpha Cloud. In fact, if you're already running on IIS, you may be ready to go. The only exception may be your database itself. Once your application is ready to go to Alpha Cloud, and that doesn't mean it's ready for production, it just means it's ready for testing, there are two steps to consider. The first is what we call publishing. Publishing copies your web project to Alpha Cloud Storage. And each time it publishes it, it creates a new version number. It's incremented each time. Old versions are kept, and in fact, you can do incremental publishing. So if you've changed one file, only one file needs to be copied out to Alpha Cloud, and we'll pull in the pieces from older versions. The second stage is deployment. This is where you actually create or update a website. Deployments are assigned to a website and path like mysite.com/ is the root application for a website, but you might also have an application path like sub-application in this example, meaning that you have a root and a child application both running on the same website. Now, each deployment is scheduled, and you'll hear us use the term scheduling an application one or more times. Each time you schedule a deployment, you select the version of your application, the build of Alpha Anywhere, and your deployment itself is assigned to a website and path. We actually encourage you to create at least one development deployment and a separate production deployment for each application so you can safely continue to develop and test. Just to give you a little bit of a graphical view, your web project is published to an application. Each time you publish, you get a new version. In this case, there are 4 versions. And we recommend that you have a separate deployment for production, for test, for development. You may just go with production and development, that's fine. It's up to you how you actually set this up. In this case, we see production is referencing version 1 of your application. Presumably it's been tested, it's running in production, and you have published 3 more versions. Version 3, in this example, is being used by test. That may ultimately be promoted to the production deployment. Version 4 is your development deployment. So it's a nice rad cycle that you can use to publish and deploy a new version of your app to development. Make a change, publish, deploy, test, publish, deploy, test. When you're comfortable with that, you can change your test deployment to use the version that you're comfortable with. And when test is complete, you can move that version to production. Now that means that you can also roll back, and we'll talk about that. Let's take a look at what is required to publish and deploy an application. So what happens if you break something? Well, you can redeploy the last working version using the Management Deployments dialog. Then you can go off as you have time, fix the bug, retest, publish the updated web project, then go back to Manage Deployments and deploy the tested version. You can do this as many times as you need to. Once a version of your application is published to Alpha Cloud, it's there pretty much forever, and you can roll back to it as you need to. The way you do that is you go to the Manage Deployments dialog and click on Add to Schedule. From there, you'll select the version of your application, the build of Alpha Anywhere, and set your logging and your behavior for publishing users and groups. Okay, let's stop and take a look at what's required, how you go about rolling back to a prior version of an application. Now, once you're running your application, you expect to be able to access logs, to look at usage, to get some sense of what's going on with your application. The Cloud View dialog is the place you do that. In that dialog, you can see the status of instances assigned to your application. You can see the history of the last deployment. You can look at usage data. You can look at logs, such as the IIS log. We also have a consolidated log called the Alpha Anywhere log that includes trace information and XBasic error logs, or what you would normally see on your local disk. We also capture failed request logs, and you can view them right in the Cloud View. And we have a dump file tab that allows you to grant us permission to your deployment so that we can pull that dump file down and look at it directly in the debugging environment. You don't need to send that file to us at all. One example of a tab on that dialog is the CPU time as shown here by application request. We'll see this in the demo, but you can actually see a chart of how your components are used. You can look at logs. They're done by hour. We'll talk about that in the demo. And we've actually embedded the XSLT transform that IIS generates along with failed requests so that you can look at some fairly complex information to see why a particular request has failed. Again, that's all within the Cloud View dialog. Okay, let's stop. Let's take a look at the Cloud View dialog. Now you can test your application. You can make it available to users, all within the process that we've just discussed. When you go to production, there are a couple of things that you're probably going to want to do to make your application look as polished as possible. The first is that you're going to want to set up a host name on your own domain. To do that, you need to purchase or update your domain if you have one already, and then have your DNS provider or use their interface to create what's called a CNAME. And a CNAME simply links your URL to the URL that Alpha Cloud automatically generates for you. When you do that, you're also going to create a TLS or SSL certificate. TLS is the new name, by the way. SSL is an older protocol. And when we say TLS, we really mean the same thing as we used to with SSL. So you're going to purchase a certificate. This is a fairly involved process, and we're not going to cover it in detail here. If you run into problems, shoot an email to cloudsupport@alphasoftware.com, and we'll be happy to walk you through the process. Once you have completed that purchase, you're going to have three things that you need to upload to Alpha Cloud. You're going to have a certificate. You're going to have a private key that's generated during the process of requesting the certificate. And then you're going to have a set of files that we often refer to as a chain file or chain files. They're also called intermediate files, and they're part of what connects your certificate to a well-known certificate that's installed on a browser. Once you have those three pieces, you're going to update your website on Alpha Cloud. You're going to take the uploaded certificate and assign it to your website, and you're going to set a host name on your website. Make sure that you have selected HTTPS as your service. It's the default, and that should be the case for most of you. Finally, make sure that you update your deployment on Alpha Cloud to set your logging to basic or none. It just means that if something does show up in the log, it'll be easier to find. It's not a significant performance killer if you have diagnostic or debugging logging turned on. You can set your database storage connection string for your deployment. Now, chances are you did this during test because you created a production deployment. If you haven't, you want to go to your deployment for production and make sure that the settings are correct for your production database. That assumes that you have a separate one from testing, which is probably a good idea. Also, make sure that your database connection is secure. That means that if you're using Amazon RDS, for example, you check the little box on the TLS tab that says, I want a secure connection. We'll take it from there. We have all of the certificates built into Alpha Anywhere to work with Amazon RDS to create a secure connection. If you have a database behind your own firewall, you may need to actually install certificates, and that's covered a little bit in documentation. This is a view of the dialog where you update your certificate. You notice at the top we have browse for certificate, browse for private key, browse for intermediate certificates. Those are the three pieces I talked about. Once you load them, you simply click upload and those will become available on Alpha Cloud. And you'll see them in the website dialog when you go to update your website. And here again on the Manage Websites dialog are the host name, the service, and the certificate that we're concerned about. Make sure those are set and we'll take it from there. Your certificate will be installed on the server along with the certificate that we already had. You notice right now there's no certificate set, there's no host name set, and the URL or the web path that shows at the bottom is one that Alpha Cloud generates. It says Alpha Software because this is the Alpha Software subscription. It says Contacts because that's the name of the Contacts website. When you set your host name, you'll also see a URL for yourself. And if it says HTTP down here, take note, change this to HTTPS, and do that before you go to production. A side note, I mentioned updating your database connection string. The Manage Application Properties dialog can be used to set a connection string, but it is going to be replaced every time you publish based on the publish profile. To set a specific connection string for production, choose Manage Deployment Properties and set your connection string on your deployment as opposed to on the application itself. A little bit about security applications. Microsoft Internet Information Services, or IIS, uses a membership provider. This is an interface that's defined by Microsoft, and there are multiple plugins that work for it. On Alpha Cloud, we run the MySQL plugin, the membership and role providers. Since Alpha Cloud is running IIS, it makes perfect sense. Each security application on Alpha Cloud defines how you want a set of users and roles to be used by Alpha Cloud deployed applications. So think of it as the handle for a set of users and roles. A security application has a unique name. It's assigned a region, and that's important because we're going to create a database in that region for logging in. You want that region to be in the same, or you want the security application to be in the same region as you have deployed your website, just for performance standpoints. There are some overrides on that dialog for security settings. Most people don't need to set them, but they're there in case you want to. Each deployment is assigned to a single security application. So when you log into a deployed application, you're already connected, if you will, to a specific security application or set of users and roles. Now, conversely, more than one deployment can reference the same security application. So you can share users and roles across multiple applications. That means that if a user changes their password in one application, that password will be changed in every application that shares that same security application. When you publish users and roles, by default, we use an option called Preserve. And what that means is a security application and a backing database store are created automatically when you publish for the first time. Users and roles are published to that database. They're published once and only once. Anytime you publish after that, we don't touch that security application or the database. You can choose to upload users and roles with other options. For example, ignore says don't even bother. Maybe security's turned off. You don't even want a security database. You can select merge if you've added new users or added new roles. You can select merge roles if you've added new roles, but you don't want to touch your users. Replace and replace roles do just that. If you select replace, you will wipe out every user and every role in that security application and replace it with what's in your web project. You want to use that carefully. Replace roles is similar, but it won't touch users. Keep in mind that if you replace all of your users, you've literally set the passwords back to whatever's in your web project. So use this with a great deal of caution. It's not the typical way that you want to be updating your application on Alpha Cloud. What you want to do is use the templates that are included in Alpha Anywhere for managing users and roles as part of your application. You may want to create a separate web application to manage users and roles for a specific security application. Remember that whatever deployment is selected for that application is going to be assigned a security application, and you'll be updating the users and roles for that application. For example, if you've shared a set of users across deployed applications by using a single security application, you can update those in one place. In the future, we're going to be removing replace and replace roles from the publish dialogues and the deployment dialogues simply as a precaution. The only place you'll be able to do a replace or replace roles will be in the publish project users and applications dialog that's available off of the security application dialog. Now here's how you get to it. Manage security applications is available, of course, off the toolbar by selecting Alpha Cloud Advanced. By selecting Alpha Cloud Security. The button labeled Publish Project Users and Roles will take you to the dialog that publishes users and roles, and you can publish from two places. If you've deployed to the classic server, you may want to move your existing security information to Alpha Cloud. And you can do that by exporting your users and roles from your classic server application and then using that file to publish to Alpha Cloud. That's something you do once. It's a migration step. You can also publish directly from the web project, and again, you notice that you have the same selections for publish options that we just talked about, preserve being the default. Again, if you have questions, be sure to shoot an email to cloudsupport@alphasoftware.com. We're happy to walk you through it. That's it. Let's answer any questions.